Welcome to the Growth Over Grades podcast, where we talk about education ideas and topics that matter most to our Spaces EDU educator community. I'm your host, Melanie McAllister, educator advocate for Spaces EDU, your solution for digital documentation and assessment of student learning for all. In this episode, I will be talking with Dr. James Neihof. Dr. Neihof is a co-director of Deeper Learning for the Green River Regional Education Cooperative. He's an education consultant and former superintendent. And while all of those titles are impressive in themselves, he is on a mission to encourage public school educators and provide leadership coaching. The more I've learned about Dr. Neihof's work as a middle school teacher, I definitely feel that encouragement. The work he has done in Kentucky has highlighted and helped build the foundation for competency-based education, which leads to teacher and student agency. Agency is when the person doing the work in whichever role is leading the way for their own growth. Dr. Neihof, and I'm going to call you James because you gave me permission. You have shared about your work, and I'm going to include that in our show notes. But it is such an honor to have you on the Growth Over Grades podcast today. Before we get started, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your journey in education?
Sure. So thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be with you, and I love the name Growth Over Grades. That is just a fantastic name, and just that name alone makes me feel that you're a kindred spirit.
Yes.
My journey began in that I didn't start teaching until I was in my later 20s, and my parents had been teachers, and I was certain that I wanted to do something else, but the calling was there. So I started teaching at age 28. And when I began teaching, it was the first year for what was called education reform in the state of Kentucky, which was the beginning of the standardized testing craze. And so I experienced that from the very beginning of my career. And it took me several years to realize that there were possibly some things about that weren't exactly the right model, and we needed to work on some changes. So by the time I became a superintendent, I realized I was in a place to take a look at some of those things. And I'll explain that part of the journey a little later, but that's kind of in a nutshell, my journey to this point.
Awesome. And I didn't ask you this before. What were you teaching before you became a leader in education?
I taught technology education and taught at mostly the high school level. I did a couple of years in a middle school setting, mostly at the high school level. And then became an assistant principal at the high school level, high school administration, and then went into central office.
Awesome. Well, I've got to look at your social media, and I do appreciate, we are kindred spirits, and the growth for me also is very important, more than traditional grades and traditional teaching. So I love that we're going to be talking today. And you've been in education for 30 plus years. That's pretty amazing. But you are still very excited about education. So I just want to know what really gets you excited.
Well, what really gets me excited, I guess, if I were to give it a technical name that people know about, would probably be this concept of student agency. And people say, well, what do you mean by agency? And what we mean, most of us who use that terminology are building towards this place when we can release a lot of decision making to students. So students are making self-initiated decisions with appropriate guidance from educators and possibly advisors. I'm a big believer in the advisory structure to help guide kids towards agency. But to put it simply, it's students have more voice in how they learn and what they learn, and students have more choice in how they learn and what they learn. And really helping people lead schools of that nature, that gets me very excited. I will tell you that you talked about my journey earlier, and one of the things I would want to share is that when I became a superintendent in 2008, schools in Kentucky were ranked in percentile rankings in the state methodology. And the district where I became superintendent was ranked at the 29th percentile, which, when you look at a high stakes accountability world, that's not considered very good. And I'm a competitor in many ways. And I spent 4 years really diving into how do we improve test scores. And as that journey went on, I was more and more believing that, even if we achieved that, wasn't telling the whole story. And so by 2012, we were at the 79th percentile.
Wow.
Most people would call that a meteoric change in 4 years to go from the 29th to the 79th. And I spent a lot of time in classrooms, and I was in an elementary classroom, and all of our schools had classroom leaders and greeters and various tasks. And so anytime I would enter an elementary classroom, almost any time, I would have a student get up and come greet me and introduce themselves, and I would greet them and shake hands and so forth. And this one day, this third grade classroom, the young lady met me at the door, and she told me her name, and I was shaking her little hand, and she introduced herself and identified herself this way. She said, we'll call her Melody. I'm Melody, and I'm a novice. Her label for herself is a testing term, novice.
Yeah.
And it just stopped my heart. It was like a punch to say, that's my fault. It's the system I lead caused her to believe that's what I want to know about her. And that was a real changing point for me as a leader, to say, we have to figure out a different way to help kids create their own value, their self-worth. And then, another big piece that led really to my shifts towards being focused on competency-based education had to do with what a term that people are starting to use now, which I like a lot, is readiness. This idea of readiness. And readiness for the next grade level, readiness for middle school, readiness for high school, readiness for what I do after I graduate from high school. But this idea of readiness. And I can remember having conversations with seniors, one-on-one interviews with seniors as a superintendent. And one of our senior leaders said to me, she said, "How in the world do you think you're getting me ready for adulthood when I can't even go pee without your permission?"
Yeah.
And it was like, I don't have an answer for that.
Right.
That's a great point. And those were the sort of experiences that started me towards this idea of what is student agency. And so then my doctoral work, I was starting that about the time I had that conversation with that girl in 2012. So I was late to get a doctorate. I was well into my career, and I was working on this doctorate, and the program is competency-based. Wow. And so it's a 60-hour program with a dissertation, and I wasn't thinking about what class I was in. I was thinking about these 36 competencies that I was trying to develop artifacts for, and having a conversation with the instructor about how do I prove mastery of this with an artifact. And that was my start into competence-based ed. So by the time I completed my doctorate, we had written a strategic plan in the district to start the first 4 years of a shift to competency-based ed.
I love that. Some of the things that are really standing out to me about your stories that you're sharing, and you are on social media, I am on social media, and there are some people that say we talk too much about relationships, but when you're sharing your story and the work that you do, it all starts with that relationship. The relationship with where we see their students have with themselves, and then again, like your leadership, the relationship that we have with our students. And I've even read in your articles about how so much of this comes from classroom community and the ability for students to be able to explore and take these risks. And so that really does stand out to me. And also just the fact that you're able to not just put out the happy celebratory stories, but yeah, like these moments where it just stops you in your tracks and changed your trajectory and your leadership. So just as somebody who's learning from others all the time, I appreciate that very much. And I also just appreciate the fact that you care about relationships, you care about the community that you are in, and the way that students are building that. As we go, yeah. And I also want to just ask, because what you're talking about, like students just going to the bathrooms, not having to ask that, that's just every day, right? Doesn't matter how old you are. Hey, I have to get somebody to cover my class, if I have to go to the bathroom. So we're talking about something that, while it isn't super, super duper new or anything, it's still not mainstream. So I want to ask you, if people are looking to put competency-based education, student agency, if they're looking for these to be priority and the change or the shift in education, how do they go along building that foundation for it?
Yeah, well, I hear people say this, and if you Google competency-based ed or competency-based learning, one of the things you'll read oftentimes is competency-based education is a major shift. But there's something after that. It's a shift in something. It's not a hard stop after the word shift. But what I often hear people say is, well, that's a major shift. And what I want to say is, well, a shift in what? What are the shifts? And so I think there's, it's important to say, well, there's a cultural shift. There's a cultural shift. There's a structural shift. And there are some pedagogical shifts. But all of those things are shifts that are targeted at improving on the traditional model. And so one of my friends who led with me in the district through this work would often say, when people would want to go back to, but this is the way we did it before, in a remembering it fondly way. And her answer would, Lisa Smith, and her answer would be, how did that work for you?
Mm-hmm.
If it had worked really well,
right,
we probably wouldn't be talking about shifts. So you needed to shift anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, those are the shifts: culture, structures, and pedagogy. Those are the three big shifts that we're going to work on. And so I love what Aurora Institute has done. Aurora Institute has identified 7 components that belong in competency-based ed. And I think when we direct people to them and say, well, just take a look at those, are those things you'd like to see happen in your school?
Mm-hmm.
Most people will say yes. So I'm just going to skim them quickly. Students are empowered daily to make important decisions about learning experiences, so they can create and apply knowledge and help determine how they're going to demonstrate what they've learned. I hear a lot of people, that's the first one. I hear a lot of teachers tell me kids just don't want to do it. They're smart enough, they're capable, they just don't want to. Well, find out what they want to do.
Right.
To me, that's the big question. Find out what they want to do. Find out what they're curious about. And so to me, that's, if you're going to empower students, then you got to give them some say.
Yeah.
And that's the first big piece. And then the second one, every teacher I mentioned this to, they go, oh yeah, that's what I want. It's this: assessment is meaningful, positive, and it's a learning experience.
Mm-hmm.
Assessment is meaningful, it's positive, and it's a learning experience. Most kids will tell you in a traditional environment that assessment is negative. I just don't talk to kids who say, yeah, assessment it's a positive experience. However, when you design a learning experience, when you give a child the opportunity to present in front of others, what often comes was they'll present and they'll have all kinds of information and skills. And then they'll say, that was the most fun thing I've ever done. I remember a 5th grader who wanted to do a training on It was something environmental. It was about the outdoors. And it was something that I really wasn't too curious about, but he was curious about. So he asked if he could invite kids to stay after school for this. And the teacher set it up so he could put out the invitation. And almost 100 kids he didn't know, stayed after school to hear his presentation.
Wow.
And he went home and told his parents that night, that is the most fun I've ever had at school. But he learned a tremendous amount. He did all kinds of research, and he demonstrated mastery. So to me, assessment is meaningful, positive, and empowering. That's a no-brainer. So the third one is students receive timely and differentiated support based on their individual needs. Every teacher says, I want to do that. I don't know how. It's just got too many kids with too many different places. That's what I've heard all my career. My kids are just at too many different places. I can't provide timely feedback. Well, if you make steps towards becoming competency-based, there are structures you can change that help you give timely individual feedback. The next one is progress is based on mastery, not seat time. That is the big thing that people will tell me they don't want to do about competency-based ed. I can't figure out how to help kids advance based on mastery, because what if a kid gets done, on Tuesday and another kid gets done on Thursday, or gets done in January and another kid gets done in March? And so school structures, you have to tackle that as administrators. That's a hard one. That's a hard one. You have to figure out how to allow kids to move. But the interesting thing is almost every state is working on that and understanding that that's important. So the next one is a little tougher. Students learn actively, but they have different paces. And so you have to be able to accommodate in your structural design for pace. And, that's tough. It's challenging. But when we succeed at that, we watch kids flourish.
Yeah.
Adult learners as well.
Right.
The same way. So there are two more, and then we'll just quickly hit them. You design strategies in your instructional pedagogy to ensure that equity exists.
Yeah.
And in my experience, all the years I was superintendent, even thinking back to my classroom days, inequity was just rampant. And we didn't even know. I had a conversation with a friend the other day. I'm left-handed. Had a conversation with a friend the other day about all the things that right-handers just don't get.
Right.
About that. I understand how hard so many things are, because a whole lot of things I pick up aren't even made for a left-hander. They're made for a right-hander to use. And, that's an example. If you're not left-handed, you don't realize it's inequitable. And then the final one is the expectations for mastery allow for, and this is the key word to me about competency-based learning, allow for transference. The idea that, and I love to talk about it in terms of flying a plane. You can either fly it or you can't. And if I can fly the plane, whether I take a standardized test or not about how to fly a plane, somewhat irrelevant. If I can take off and navigate and land, that's what's crucial. And so that's transferability. So the idea that mastery is about transference, and all the other things about whatever expectations we might have about how kids arrive at mastery, they're really not relevant. Transference is what we have to get to. And that's the seventh one. So in my mind, if people look at those things and say, yeah, I buy into all seven, then it's time to get to work on building a competency-based system.
Yeah. When you were listing those, I'm sitting here reflecting on my own practices and my own classroom practices. And I feel like in some ways I'm getting there, and then others I'm like, no, like, especially when it comes to timing, because I'm still like, we have to be here all at the same time. We have to go here. And I just feel like too, one of the struggles that I have, and I just want to ask you, like when I do give students choice, they don't know what they want to do, and I build that into everything that I do, but I still feel like I'm dominating that. I give them choices, but I still want their ideas. And I always tell them, I'm just giving you choices. If there's something better that you want to do, all you have to do is talk to me and we will work it out. But I don't feel that confidence from my
Yeah.
students to.
So my first thought about choice, and I've said this for years, and I don't remember where I picked it up, but I just think it's great. I picked it up from a teacher. I don't remember her name. I don't remember where she taught, but it just made so much sense to me, and I've been using it for years. So choice is not willy-nilly autonomy. Choice is like this. This is the way you start choice. You provide them with two options. Option A, it's teacher-created choice. Option B is a choice, but you can demonstrate mastery this way, this way. If you don't like either one of those, you can propose a third one, but I don't want to hear you say it until you've written down how you're going to demonstrate mastery of this standard, because here's the standard we're working on, or the group of standards. If you're in a prioritized world, which I hope you are, that you prioritize standards and group them. And so, and then that becomes a competency. And right. So you're saying, here's the competency. Here's one way you can do it. Here's the second way. Third way, you make it up. You create it. So to me, instead of just saying, well, you choose, that's too much freedom. And kids don't know where to go with that.
Right.
But initially their choice is, I've designed two ways you can do this today, this way or this way. That's how choice starts. And then
I like that.
Move towards but if you don't like those, you can. And the lady who had told me about it initially, she said, for the first year or two, nobody was able to come up with their own. I had to try. But after I did it for a while and kids, got in this system, I have kids propose things and it's great.
Yeah. Ooh, I will let you know if I get better at this, but that gives me a little hope. Thank you for sharing. We're already kind of talking about this, naturally segues into this, but how does, competency-based education and student agency go together?
Yeah. So ultimately, I see agency in a competency-based environment with the moniker 3PT. So, path, you want to move towards putting kids in charge of path, place, pace, and time. So in my mind, the hardest one to give away, you need a most sophisticated level of agency to be able to be in charge of time as a kid.
Yeah, so, for sure.
Or
as an adult, just saying.
Yeah. Yeah. So place is one that I see starting the first thing teachers do when they're starting to move towards increasing agency and moving towards competency-based. So they'll have stations in their classroom at the elementary level, or they might have when they start inching towards time, they might have their readers grouped in. This group of readers reads this amount on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. This group reads this amount, and it may very well be based on their lexile level, or some other metric. But it's not that everybody's doing the same thing. And then what you want to shift towards is, then I decide how much I need to read. That's what you're working towards. But the path then. The path would be probably initially shifted based on the choices we talked about before. So choice A or choice B, but they're both teacher designed choices for the path. That's how you would start that. But path, place, pace, and time. So with pace, when you're first shifting to a competency-based environment and you're trying to give agency, pace usually is accompanied with a hard stop. So in other words, you would say to me, James, you're in charge of pace. However, this system of colors, red, green, and yellow, will let me let me give you feedback on your pace with regard to this completion date, which is December 20th. And so, this group of standards we want to be completed with by December 20th. So as I'm moving through my work, you would give me a color, and I've watched teachers do that just on a chart on the wall. But there are some really neat electronic tools to do that too. And so I saw this done at the high school level at a school in Salt Lake City a few years ago, and I thought it was neat. Every student each day in every course, when they start the day, the instructor would give them a color, and so it would be on their. They'd see it on their laptop, and during that time when that class met, if it was red, they had to attend. If it was yellow, they had choice. And if it was green, the instructor was saying to them, you're better off to work on your own or work in another class or work on something in another class, spend time with another teacher working on something where you're yellow. So in other words, I would be, as a high school student, then I would have opportunity to flex my day.
Yeah.
And so if I picture my priorities as circles, some days I would have a larger circle for my writing work and other days a larger circle for my science project and whatever that might be. But I'm constantly flexing that, and it's giving me choice. So, you could do it in a paper pencil way, analog way. I would want to do it in a digital way.
Yeah. I like that. It's a good relationship between, choice, like you said, and also the design that teachers are putting there, which when you said earlier, it's just a shift in thinking. It doesn't seem impossible. So thank you for sharing that, because I'm getting there, And I know we're getting closer to our time, but I have to ask you this question, especially because you said when you started teaching, it was like when the standardized testing started beginning in Kentucky. It was Kentucky. I am saying that correct. Yeah. So how do you feel like standardized testing helps or harms student agency?
So the current methodology with standardized testing, and I'm not anti-standardized testing, but I don't think it creates student agency. So when I think about harm, one is the question of do I get the best effort? That's one of the questions that people raise. Well, when we look at the kids who come from trauma and the unbelievable circumstances many of our kids live in, the likelihood that if we put a day on a calendar and all of them are going to show up that day feeling good, having had parents that fed them well the night before, got them in bed at a good time, got them up and fed them breakfast, gave them a hug as they walked out the door, that happens for all 100% of our kids to get them ready for test day. That just doesn't happen. It's not going to happen anywhere. So, as opposed to, if we're going to do a standardized testing system, could we do it with a digital bookshelf that says on the day when James is at his optimum, that I'm going to let him assess so I get the very best effort. I've been pushing that for years now. And I wrote a white paper about that in 2016, and it hasn't gone anywhere, which is okay. Maybe that had to do with me and my writing, but I think it's an idea worth exploring.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So that's one of the things with regard to. Another one is when with regard to harm, when as a learner, someone can demonstrate a transferable skill, and they've already demonstrated mastery in a transferable way, they can do the thing. And then we assess, and we've told them that, and then we assess them in a standardized format, which is time bound and maybe on the wrong day or whatever it might be. And their score is far different. you know, the question of whether the performance assessment gets thrown out
Right.
or not is we know what happens consistently. We tell them, well, so sorry about your luck with the performance assessment. It's irrelevant. So what I'd like to see us do is get to a place to where performance assessment is as valued as a standardized test. Not that we don't do a standardized test. I'm not saying that we would have to eliminate that. I'm saying that if our performance assessment is good enough and reputable, then the standardized test becomes irrelevant, and the performance assessment matters more because it's showing a transferable skill, and a standardized test will never assess for transference.
For sure. And it's cool because you started out on this mission when you were first becoming a superintendent, trying to improve your scores. When we first started talking about this, and actually getting into what really matters is what changed your thinking and your own leadership. And so, I mean, I don't know if it's irony, but that's really cool, that doesn't sound super smart I'm sorry, but it just is really cool because it's like a cycle, because we are trying to improve scores, but on the journey of that, we really just want our kids to feel like they belong, that their learning matters, and that they are able to meet the standards or the competencies that we put before them, and in a way that really matters and is meaningful to them, so that when they leave our school system, when they leave our classroom, that they feel capable and confident. And I want to ask you, and I didn't put this on the thing, but what is your coaching like? If somebody wants to coach with you, what is that journey like with you?
Well, I appreciate you asking that. I enjoy the coaching that I get to do. And, at some point in life, if I coach full time, I would do that. But it's a part of what I do now. The way I like to approach coaching is give a lot of choice. And the model I use, interestingly enough, the coaching model I use is called motivational interviewing. And it comes from the substance abuse world. And it's based on, what do you want to do? Because, we all know that if someone is addicted to whatever the substance might be, you can talk and talk and talk at them until you're blue in the face. And, it's wasted energy unless there is something they identify that they want to do.
Right.
I want to be sober for my child's graduation from high school.
Right.
Okay. So let's talk about what you might do to help you get there. So that's the way I use motivational interviewing strategy. So I help people decide what they want to accomplish, what they want to do, and then I coach around that. And I like the idea of, if people want to, create a 30, 60, 90-day action plan of, here's what I'd like to accomplish. So especially if it's a leader, here's how I want to influence my relevant influence in the next 30 days. And sometimes it's just, at that point, I become an accountability partner.
Right.
They're remembering, hey, I've got to talk to James next Tuesday. And
yeah.
I don't want to tell him I didn't work on this. So, but that's how coaching starts.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. And before we go, I want to ask you, because I like to ask all of my guests this, but while you have this time where people are listening, what is some wisdom that you'd like to share just about life, education, anything, before we say goodbye?
Yeah. So it's interesting. You took my word just a few minutes ago, and I loved it when you did it, because you used the word matter. So Dr. Michael Chiricello was a mentor to me. And he's passed on now. He passed away a few months ago. And he was a superintendent, retired superintendent in New Jersey. And he taught a class in my doctoral program and flew to Kentucky just to teach that class every few weeks. It couldn't have done it for the money. I mean, there's just no way. You know what universities pay. And his primary message was, in the very first class, and you think you got a group of superintendents taking this doctoral class, and he says, the focus of this class is mattering. And he insisted that we quantify and be clear on how we wanted the rest of our lives to matter, not just as educators, but as brothers and sisters and children and parents ourselves, and then as educators, how do we want to matter? And so that's, in my mind, is I would just want to encourage any educator to think first about how you want to matter. And my guess is you'll be like me, and how you want to matter is going to be bigger and deeper than I helped my kids get great test scores on a standardized test. Right. And if it is, then see where that journey takes you. That would be my message. I have a friend who was like me. He's on this same journey, and he was looking for a new superintendency. He was wanting to move to a new place. And he said, in my interviews, if they tell me what they want is great test scores, I say to them, I can do that for you. But if I do, I'll only be here one contract, because I'm looking for a district. I'm looking for a place to work that lets me do the things that I believe really matter. And those are the deep learning opportunities, student agency, giving kids control and choice.
Wow. I love that. What a great way to end this episode. Thank you all to who are listening. Thank you, Dr. James Neihof. This has been such a great time to meet you and talk with you. And those of you who are listening, I would love for you to join our Facebook community. It's facebook.com/group/spacesedu. And let's keep the conversation going. And thank you again. We'll see you again. Bye, everybody.